We are now going over to our Thailand correspondent, Gavin Flynn. Gavin, what's happening there?
Very few people in the UK saw the original broadcast due to the early hours in which it was aired, but it was officially the first mainstream news report that showed the coming plague for what it was. For those watching, the screen was split between the studio and the live reporter. The clip that followed would eventually be copied and downloaded billions of times across the world, becoming a viral phenomenon in its own right. As the plague took hold, the broadcast would be replicated by virtually every major news provider on the planet. With the viral nature of the video, many of the world's authorities didn't even bother trying to censor it. It was the message that announced the impending doom. It warned of the end of all things. I'm standing outside the Bangkok hospital where chaos reigns. There are reports of dozens of people being admitted with injuries sustained in the riots that have broken out across the city, Gavin reported. He stood with microphone in hand. In the background, the bustle of a busy hospital could be seen.
Do we know what sparked the rioting?
The news anchor asked. Not as yet. Local officials are refusing to comment, but the areas around ASOK and Nana have reportedly been sealed off. The Foreign Office has already advised that anyone planning a trip to Bangkok reconsider their travel plans. Behind Gavin, an ambulance pulled up at the hospital entrance. Before the driver could even get out, the vehicle's back door flew open and two people tumbled out. It looked like they were fighting, one raining down punches on the other with a level of violence that was shocking to see. The cameraman did his job and zoomed in on the scene.
What's that going on behind you, Gavin?
The reporter turned, the camera now totally focused on this new violence. On the floor and on his back, the paramedic was fighting off the patient, who was now clawing at him. The driver, now free of the ambulance cab, came around to help, only for the patient to leap off the ground and attack him as well. The patient easily overpowered the second man. A nurse, her white uniform stained with blood, ran out of the hospital entrance and was briefly followed by the camera. Seconds later, a dead man, naked except for boxer shorts, followed her out, his face smeared in blood. The zoom lens caught the zombie's face, the black eyes haunting to everyone that saw them. Panning back to the ambulance, the camera caught the frightful image of the driver having his throat ripped out by the patient's teeth. There was the sudden sound of a man speaking in Thai, and the camera was pushed down so that only the concrete of the hospital concourse was visible. The cameraman's feet were briefly visible.
What's happening, Gavin?
The anchor demanded. The army is here! They are forcing us out of the area! The unseen voice answered. They have guns pointed at us. Go, you go! Someone off camera shouted in broken English. Get your hands off my camera, the man filming everything obviously said. The camera was momentarily freed, and it drifted back up to the ambulance. Two soldiers could be seen approaching the paramedics and the patient. The soldiers opened fire on all three, the bullets doing little to stop the patient who ran at them. Then the news feed cut out, half of the screen visible to the TV viewers, now just white noise. The studio anchor sat there for several seconds, shock etched all over his face. What had just happened?
Shocking scenes from Thailand there. We will keep you informed of any updates as and when they happen.
The broadcast cut out. Gavin looked on in stunned awe as the camera was ripped out of his partner's hands. Flung to the floor, a well-placed military boot smashed the lens in. The soldier seemed to be taking great delight in destroying the camera, and he stamped on it several more times, screaming what were most likely obscenities in a language Gavin could barely understand. Jesus, the cameraman said. He was no longer objecting because he had a rifle aimed right at his head. The man wielding the rifle had wild eyes, a combination of fear and adrenaline. The cameraman had seen such a look before. He thus made a point of not making any sudden movements for fear that he might tip the soldier over the edge. You can't do this, Gavin stated, although there was no authority in his voice. He looked around him to try to find someone in authority, but nobody here was going to listen to his protests. With the camera destroyed, the soldiers stood menacingly for a few more seconds, then moved off towards the carnage of the hospital. Gavin foolishly took his phone out and began recording, only for a thick, calloused hand to grab it off him. The mobile went hurtling off into the distance. A captain of the Thai army appeared right in Gavin's face, the stench of periodontal disease almost overpowering. "Leave now," the captain demanded. For a Thai man, he was unusually tall and had an imposing presence. "I'm with the BBC, the world needs to know about this," Gavin insisted. Gavin tried to make out that he wasn't intimidated, even though he clearly was. The captain's response was to punch Gavin in the gut, sending the reporter down to one knee. The cameraman looked on in disbelief as the captain grabbed Gavin by the hair and started screaming into his face. "You leave now! Go! If you are still here in 5 minutes, I will shoot you myself!" The English he spoke was almost flawless. Standing, the captain nodded to someone, and 2 soldiers grabbed Gavin and the cameraman roughly. Saying something in Thai, the captain watched as the 2 Farangs were escorted to a waiting jeep where they were bundled inside. "Where are you taking us?" Gavin demanded, still winded. More patients were pouring out of the hospital now. "Airport," one of the soldiers said. As the jeep started to move, the sound of more shots echoed around them. "What the hell did we just step into?" the cameraman asked. Gavin had no answer, and as the jeep drove off, it was as if the madness of the hospital was infecting the streets. Gavin made it to the airport, but he never made it home. That was how quickly the virus overpowered the great city of Smiles.